Distinguished panel members of faculty, and my fellow future managers, a very good evening to all. I, Rachit Jain, along with my co-compare Ishan, on behalf of the Economics Club, IMI New Delhi, welcomes you all to the post-budget session 2022. The Economics Club of IMI New Delhi brings a forum to contribute, share, and learn in an environment that we create. The club organizes various events throughout the year and also writes a weekly blog that helps our viewers to appreciate the practical implication of business principles and events in the economic landscape. The post budget session is one such initiative by the club that enlightens students about the fiscally driven environment of our nation. Before we start with the discussion, let us have a look at the video made by the team.
So far, only 3 times has the budget followed a contraction in the economy.
Hospitals across India are overwhelmed, many running dangerously low on supplies, including oxygen.
Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman presented the Union Budget 2022 on February 1st. Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman said that the budget proposal for this financial year rests on health and well-being, infrastructure, inclusive development, energy transition, and climate action. Infrastructure. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman in the Union Budget for 2022-23 has raised the bet on public capital expenditure to pump prime the investment cycle and spur India's economic recovery from the pandemic through 2022 and 23.
Digital currency. The government has proposed to issue a digital rupee or central bank digital currency in the fiscal year 2022-23. Additionally, the budget also proposed imposing a tax of 30% on virtual assets, effectively legitimizing trading of private cryptocurrencies and non-fungible tokens. This is broadly in line with Centre's plan to have a fiat digital currency, while disallowing use of private virtual coin as legal tender. Agriculture. The Centre will promote Kisan drones, chemical-free natural farming, public-private partnership for the delivery of digital and high-tech services to farmers across the country during the financial year 2022-23.
Transport. The budget outlay for the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways has risen from 68.5% to rupees 1.99 trillion. The government-run National Highways Authority of India's budgetary outlay in the coming fiscal is set to rise by 133% to 1.34 trillion from rupees 573.5 billion year 22. The budget for the fiscal beginning April 2022 proposed a massive 35% jump in capital expenditure to rupees 7.5 lakh crore, coupled with rationalization of customs duty and extension of time for setting up new manufacturing companies.
The budget gave a big boost for infrastructure spending, from 5G spectrum auction expanding national highways by 25,000 kilometers, interlinking of rivers, and manufacturing of 400 new generation Vande Bharat trains. The fiscal deficit, while unexpectedly rose to 6.9% of the GDP for the current fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022, is projected to come down to 6.4% next year and 4.5% by 2025-26.
To give us insights, perspective, and help us comprehend the union budget, we are honored to have amongst us eminent personalities from different fields. Dr. Ajay Bhushan Pandey, Mr. Prithviraj Srinivas, Dr. Subhashis Gangopadhyay, Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya, and Mr. Akhilesh Bhargava. Before we begin with this session, we would like to give a brief introduction to our speakers. We are delighted to introduce you to our distinguished panelist, Dr. Ajay Bhushan Pandey, ex-Finance Secretary, Government of India and former Chief Executive Officer, UIDAI Aadhaar. Dr. Pandey has been at the helm of several historic and groundbreaking India's reforms in Aadhaar, digital payments, goods and service tax, GST, customs and central excise, direct tax, disinvestment, and government finance. Sir has also served the roles of Revenue Secretary of India, the Chairman of Goods and Service Tax Network, GSTN. As Finance Secretary and Revenue Secretary, he played a key role in preparation of India's 3 annual budgets, years 2019, 2020, and 2021. Sir, we are honored to have you here with us today.
It gives me great privilege to introduce our next panelist, Mr. Prithviraj Srinivas, Executive Director at Axis Capital. Mr. Srinivas has 16 years of experience in financial services and more than 13 years of experience in writing macroeconomic research in South Asia with a deep focus on India. He is highly rated by large domestic and foreign institutional clients for incisive research on the economy, policy action, interest rates, and exchange rates. He has spent more than 7 years at HSBC's Asia Economics Desk covering India and Sri Lanka. He has also spent more than 1 year at a third-party research firm with Deutsche Bank's money market desk as a primary client and more than 2 years with HP. Sir, we are privileged to have you here with us today.
Thank you, my pleasure.
It gives me great honor to introduce our next panelist, Dr. Subhashis Gangopadhyay, Dean at Indian School of Public Policy. Dr. Gangopadhyay has been a consultant on policies to various ministries, including finance, planning, industry, and rural development. He is currently on the board of International Development Enterprises India. Besides handling a number of high-profile advisory roles, he has led important government research projects like the leading indicator of government economic activity, the impact of steel decontrol on sale, the optimum use of Hazira, Bijapur, Jagdishpur gas pipeline, and so on. Sir, we are privileged to have you here with us today.
It gives me great privilege to introduce our next panelist, Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya, the Editorial Director at Business Standard. Mr. Bhattacharya is an economic journalist. He has served as the editor of Business Standard and is currently its editorial director. For many years, he has been writing a column, Raisina Hill, which appears in Business Standard and comments on government affairs, development issues, and the economy. A former General Secretary of Editors Guild of India, he won the Shri Ram Lifetime Achievement Award for Excellence in Financial Journalism in 2017. Sir, we are honored to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
It gives me great honor to introduce our moderator. It gives me great honor to introduce our moderator and speaker for the session, Mr. Akhilesh Bhargava. Mr. Bhargava is the co-founder and chief editor for business and financial news at HW News. He has an illustrious career spanning nearly 4 decades as a practicing chartered accountant with expertise in international tax, FEMA, joint ventures and finance, financial restructuring, and forensic investigations. He is an economist, chartered accountant, financial consultant, author, and business columnist with various publications in India and abroad. Sir, we are privileged to have you here with us today.
Thank you very much.
Dear attendees, you can send in your questions that you would like to ask panelists to Rahul Gupta on Zoom chat. Without any further ado, we once again welcome all the guests and request Mr. Akhilesh Bhargava to initiate the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, MC. Not for the sake of formality, but genuinely, I'm so honored and so delighted that I'm actually moderating a discussion of such an eminent panelists on the Union Budget 22. We actually have very eminent people on board, and it's such a pleasure, sir. The budget, of course, is a very difficult document for a lot of people. The general expectation that is there out of the budget is on three fronts, as I put it. An expectation that short-term burning issues that plague the economy, that plague the common man, will be somewhere resolved, some relief would be given. The second expectation is a medium-term strategy for growth of the economy. And of course, we also expect a long-term vision for the economy in the budget. Sir, we are all today for knowledge. We are all today to get the knowledge out of our panelists, all of whom have got a wonderful, extremely impressive background. Coming back to the budget, experience says that a budget which is probably the most brilliant is often found to be the most mediocre when it is looked into by those who are not on the side of the government. And the most mediocre budget is rated to be the most brilliant one when it is spoken of by those who are on the side of the government. Today, we are all on neither side. We are on the side of knowledge. We are on the side of having a very unbiased and extremely impartial and candid discussion on the budget. And that's what we're all here for. While, of course, the IMI has presented a brief run-up to the budget, I just want to draw attention to a few burning issues which I thought would be covered as a priority matter in the entire budget structure that came yesterday. The burning issues that I think the challenges that are there in the economy that need to be addressed. The first one I think is there has been a very perceptible slowdown in consumer spending. Consumers remain uncertain, they lack confidence, they are not spending, that's impacting growth. The second, of course, is private sector investment has been languishing. The sector's balance sheets are loaded with profits and money, of course. They are not willing to spend and invest in new projects. The third has been rising inequality, and it has gone to worrisome levels. The next is the struggling MSME and unorganized sector of India. The next is elevated inflation, a stubborn inflation. It has been there worldwide. India is no exception, but it is now biting the common man in a big way. And the last one that I see is huge levels of unemployment. The solution to all of them, we think, lie in growth. What we need is growth. We need consistent growth. We need sustainable growth. We need growth on a sequential month-to-month basis, quarter-to-quarter basis. And perhaps that is missing. We thought probably growth would be the theme of the budget that was present yesterday. And that's what the newspapers have all headlined it as. I want to read a few headlines. The Financial Express headlines calls the budget a growth booster. Business Standard says that the budget bets big on public infra. The headline in Hindustan Times is Capital Path to Recovery Road when it talks about the budget. Economic Times says FM's booster shot. Times of India says it is Pragati gets spending booster. The Mint calls it Eye on the Future, Need for Speed. And the Business Lines calls it a capex carnival. All of it are actually looking into growth, are looking at the budget as something which is going to boost growth. That's the background that I see as far as an analysis in newspapers is concerned. But then here, we are for an analysis and viewpoint of the panelists that we have today. I must tell you, I've had the privilege of knowing Dr. Ajay Bhushan Pandey as somebody I respect, somebody I've known for long. And Ajay ji, today the first question is directed to you actually. Ajay ji, you have been in the center of power. You have been there in the budget formulation and many other initiatives which India has been experiencing and living today, starting from your being in charge of Aadhaar and down the line. So many technology initiatives of the country have been helmed by you. Since you have been involved in budget formulation and you have been in the inner corridors of budget making, the first question that I have for all of us is, what is the extent of political agenda or influence that goes into budget formulation? And if political dispensation overrules prudence, then are the numerous representations that are made to the finance minister in the run-up to the budget just mere optics. So we need to understand from you, sir, what is the extent of the political involvement or content in a budget that we see every time?
Thank you very much, first of all, for organizing this panel discussion on such a, the current topic, which is like, the whole country is debating on, the budget, and then what is there and what is not there, and then what exactly will it do. Akhilesh ji, you have kind of given some brief overview of, the expectations from the budget, and then, what it has done and what perhaps, could have done, those things you have mentioned here. When you ask about this political thing, first of all, let us be very clear, because I have had the privilege of preparing 4 budgets, in fact, right? 3, the annual budget and 1 vote on account. And, as a revenue secretary, because this is where, he collates all the information from the various ministries and departments and then gives a shape of the budget. So, we are, our country is a democratic country, right? And we have a political democracy. And we have a political, institutions there, which is a government. And so therefore, certain influence, whatever is the, the agenda of the government, it is very, very difficult to delineate as to what exactly, because, if you are having a political democracy and if you have a political people, running the government, then certain, their own, the ideology and other things are bound to come. But having said that, my own experience, and then, the people may, I would be very, very frank when I would say that in spite of that, in so far as the budget preparation was concerned, I found, in every year, absolute, the professional approach. And, and whenever, basically there could be, some different opinions that whether this particular, strategy would work or some other strategy should be. So there could be discussion about these alternatives, various alternatives. But so far as the outcome was concerned, I didn't find any, some kind of a deviation or something that, look, we should not have an inclusive growth, for example. We should not be a kind of a, the India should be, India should do everything possible to lead us to, becoming a developed economy, right? And, we should have, for example, if it was a tax collection, right? We should have a very, very simple and transparent taxation regime, for example, right? Then similarly, if it was for the infrastructure development, this is how the infrastructure needs to be developed, right? If vulnerable sections had to be taken care or their problems had to be addressed, then those had to be addressed. So what I see here is that after a certain time, the politics actually stops. And if I see, this particular budget, because, this was a budget, after having presented 4 earlier budget, I was also very curious because being from the, to look it from the outside. And I was very, very pleasantly, I was surprised, right? And in fact, I was very happy that, look, see what we used to always resist. And when I say the resist, not the resist to the political, the bosses of the government. There used to be a massive, the demands and then the temptations and, coming from the various different sources about the tinkering of the tax structure, right? And somehow, over the period of time, what had happened is that the budget had become an occasion to tinker the, the tax structure. Because unless and until you do something, in the form of tax relief to, every sector, your budget was not considered as a complete. So what we did, that is why I remember in 2019, of the budget, in September 2019, we reduced the corporate tax because normally, one would have waited for reduction of the corporate tax. So we did this reduction of the corporate tax and we said that, look, this is what we have done. We have removed all exemptions. We also brought in last year this simplified taxation regime in the year 2020 budget. And then basically we said that, look, the tinkering of the exemptions, tinkering, of the, the slab, tax slab rates and other things, that should not be very, very frequently resorted to. If you study the tax policies of the developed world, do you find in UK, USA every year, the people changing their tax slabs, right? Or, adding to some exemptions or something or the other. And therefore, and that is why, whenever I used to interact with various chambers of commerce and everyone, I said that, look, it's not that the government wants to do it. Because yes, within the government also, there will be certain political elements who will say that, let's, give tax relief to this section, that section, right? But ultimately, this is not the occasion. So budget is a much, much broader than that. And basically, it is in a statement of your intent that in which direction you want to take the economy to. Now, the second thing is about the expenditure also. Of course, budget is an annual financial statement where you are basically trying to balance that this much money you are getting, and then this is what you tend to spend the money, and on a capital and the revenue, and then, how are you going to finance the deficit and how much will be the deficit. But many times what we miss is that we start judging the budget only by the, the outlays. Of course, the outlay is very, very important. But there are many things, where, the outlay will be very minimal, but then the impact will be quite phenomenal. I will give you a simple example. I used to work in Aadhaar, right? And if you see the total budget of Aadhaar, the total in the last 10 years, the last, Aadhaar was started in 2010, and 2010 to 2021, the total budget of Aadhaar would be around 11,000, 12,000 crores. So every year, we used to get around 1,000 crores of rupees. But just see that with that 1,000 crore rupees every year, what a massive change has happened. So what I liked about this budget was that, there are many things because sometimes in the budget, one gets tempted to, tinker the tax structure or basically be very outlay driven. But then there are certain other opportunities which are there in the budget to declare your intent. And once those intents are declared, I can tell you that, those things are very, very, within the government system. They are monitored. And after all, we are living in the parliamentary democracy. The MPs can ask, the people can ask saying that, look, in 2015 or 2012, certain announcements were made in the budget speech. What did you do? So I think, from that point of view, so this particular budget, so far as the political inputs are there for every budget, but so far as the final outcome, I would say that the outcome is completely kind of a professional, it has been during the last 3-4 years, when I was there. And this year also, I see the same, the signature.
Ajay, it is so reassuring to hear what you're saying. And of course, it is the most authentic statement that we can get. After all, as you said, you've been part of 4 budget formulations. That's like, for me, it's very, very reassuring. Mr. Bhattacharya, I have a question to you, which is, the question that comes is, should the budget be seen more as a government's annual cash flow statement and less as a big bang annual landmark, which must provide solutions to the current burning issues? I mean, do we just want to look at the budget as a bland cash flow statement of the government, or is it meant to be such a big issue that we in the media tend to make it?
Thank you very much for this slightly provocative question. I think it should be both, in my view, because, we are, after all, a developing economy. We are not in the same stage of economic development that a developed economy can claim to be. We are, in the policy space, we are still evolving. So therefore, while the budget, which as a matter of fact, does not find any mention in India's constitution, the Constitution of India actually wants an annual financial statement to be laid on the table of the House. So a budget is a sort of an invention of the political apparatus in this country. So I think a budget has to be both a statement of the government's account and also a statement on what the government intends to achieve through its policy framework. Now, obviously, it has to sort of intertwine the fiscal policy framework with the fiscal numbers, the outlays, and in the last several years, you also have something on the outcomes. So if you read the budget documents, and this is addressed to the many students who are listening to us, is that if somebody were to come to me and ask me that what should I do to understand the Indian economy at present, I would say that get hold of all the budget documents that every year the government has produced, and along with the Read the Economic Survey, you will get a sense of what is really happening to one large side of the Indian economy. After all, if you take the center, it's almost 16% of GDP or 17% of GDP in the latest estimate is the budget's contribution to the economy. So therefore, I am not one of those who believe that the budget should stay away from just making stay away from making policy statement. I think is a very important part of the budget. The way I look at budget is, I look at the budget from largely four perspectives. One is what is the overall macroeconomic stance the government has taken with regard to the economy. And the second would be what has been the government's expenditure priorities. And the third is obviously what has been its taxation philosophy as such. And finally, I look at what is the kind of reform agenda or the policy perspective that the budget provides. So if I were to judge any budget, I will judge a budget with those four parameters in mind. So that's what I would say. When I say the macroeconomic stance, I talk about, what is the fiscal deficit, what is the interest payment liability. When I talk about the expenditure priorities, what has been the capex increase, has the revenue expenditure gone up or come down, is the subsidies allocations good enough or realistic or not? On taxation, has there been too many disruptions? Is there a long-term stable picture emerging? Are the custom duties unnecessarily going up or down? So these are the taxation. And finally, reform agenda. I mean, does the budget talk about reforms in as assertive a way as this economy currently needs? Or does it decide to drop the whole word called privatization from a budget speech? And is that sending out a signal? So these are some of the things that I would like to understand from the budget. So I hope I have answered your question. I tried to be brief. Yeah.
I have another question for you, sir, which is a takeoff on the contents as you see it.
Yeah.
If you see this year's budget, sir, out of the 29 pages of the FM speech, 20 pages were devoted to the Amrit Kal initiatives and policy programs and vision that the government is trying to spell out. What one noted was a lot of heavy announcements made, but they were devoid of definitives, they were devoid of any kind of specifics, details, or whatever for you to judge the fiscal impact, the monetary impact, or whatever one would want to see it. I have been seeing some kind of a trend, and you are the right person to say whether I'm right or wrong, because you write a column called Rice in a Hill and you're watching Rice in a Hill. Earlier, the budget used to have extremely detailed content in terms of expenditures or the outlays or the monies or the timelines, etc. Later on, during the time of Mr. Arun Jaitley, what one noticed was that he would skip those, but say very clearly, all the details and specifics are there in the annexes to my speech. or to the budget. Then came a time when we saw something different in the budget speech, which is the announcement that were made sometimes were an aggregate of a program which ran over many years. For example, you might have an announcement saying that we are going to spend, let's say, 3 lakh crores on child welfare. But when you looked at the fine print, it was not an expenditure in 1 year, but it was spread over 10 years. But for making a statement, it sounded very good. And now we see in this year that the details, the definitives, the particulars, the specifics are missing. Do you see a pattern in that, sir?
Well, you are like a bowler who is bowling a full toss at a batsman. So I have to go out for and hit a 6.
Please.
No, I think the budget speech making has seen, in my view, deterioration over a period of at least 10-15 years. Good old days. If I've been studying budgets for several years, and if you look at the budget speeches, I'm not talking even about the Manmohan Singh budget. Even earlier, a budget speech was crafted in a way that you would get a sense of a whole. But in the last 10 years or so, one gets a deterioration in the quality of the budget speech, in the sense they look like, to use a very, very raw expression, a cut and paste job of different ministries, different departments, or different players in this government system are sending notes, and those notes are, Mr. Pandey, please don't misunderstand me, are cut and paste and then made into a speech. They even a good idea, for example, a good idea on the capex, which is going up, or a good idea like 1 lakh crore of money being given to the states as a 50-year interest-free loan, is not expanded and placed in the overall context of what the government is trying to achieve. Now, it is summarized in one para without giving the full context. Now, to my mind, a little talked about initiative of this budget is that 1 lakh crore of money being given to the states. Now, how do you contextualize the whole thing? Now, is it going into the capex or it is not going into the capex? Has the capex gone up because of this or not? One doesn't know. So my question is that when you read the budget speeches these days, you do feel you are left with asking for more. You want more contextualization, and I think that has been the trend for the last. It is not a BJP government problem. I think I saw the problem for at least even in Manmohan Singh's Prime Minister's time. I used to find that Mr. Pranab Mukherjee's speeches were not really crafted well. So that's my sense, and I think that a budget speech must have a connect with the budget documents. It of late I find that connect is not there. I will give you an example from the current year's budget. Now it talks about capex increase in a big way. It does not mention the fact that the revenue expenditure is just going up by less than 1%, which to my mind is a great statement to make, but it does not mention that. When you look at the numbers, you realize that host of items like subsidies on food has gone down, subsidies on fertilizer has gone down, subsidies on petroleum have also gone down. Now you start wondering that should I get an explanation from the budget speech? Okay, listen, I have reduced my revenue expenditure increase to only less than 1%, and I believe that I will not continue my Pradhan Mantri Garib Anya Yojana for the next year because I believe that it is not needed. Now that kind of explanation and contextualization of the numbers, I think it is left to people to read into it and get into different sources and read and connect and talk to, Mr. Pandey off the record, and then Mr. Pandey would have explained to us. So that is something that is happening. And I don't think it is a good trend. Budget making has to be completely, as holistic as possible This is my view.
Ajay, would you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so you see, I mean, there is one perspective, but I'll tell you, I'll give you a little, different perspective. You see, this budget, if you see the logistics constraint, this budget document usually has about 9,000 words. I mean, this is what, when we used to prepare the budget speech, you had to do it around 9,000, 10,000 words, right? In some years, it went to about 11,000, 12,000 words. Then the speech dragged on for 2.5 hours or so. So what happens is, yes, we would have very much liked to, give you the full, the passage and the paragraph and giving you the details, right? But then, making a balance of, saying the same thing, in a very, very precise manner. And I'll give you an example. You mentioned, because sometimes, if you give you an example and then, you get the clarity. This 1 lakh crore to the states, right? The interest-free loan to the states for 50 years. I mean, this is something, I'll tell you the little background. And I do understand that this is a challenge, that on one hand, you have a limitation of, the number of words, and that's why, the resort to the annexers. Maybe, the annexers could have been a little more explanatory. There I would agree with you, right? So now, for example, 1 lakh crore. Now, and what usually happens is that if you want to, do any reform and there you want the state governments to participate, right? Then, there has to be certain give and take, right? And therefore, this 1 lakh crore is like something like this. If you read the document there, what it says is that 1 lakh crore will be given and this money will be spent on, certain reforms. And what are those reforms? The reforms in the bylaws, reforms in the, urban areas, and various others like, the industrial park, the infrastructure, even in the SEZ, for example, now the SEZ are being revamped. So if let us say each paragraph can take, the few pages, if you are going to, put the entire context, right? And considering the constraint that it has, and that is why, it is always a challenge of those 9,000, 10,000 words. But I agree with you that, maybe, the annexer today, the annexers, and to that extent, I would say that if you read the annexers, Akhilesh ji would appreciate, in the particularly about the taxation part of that budget speech, right? It has a much more clarity on the, when you look at the finance bill and then the memorandum where, the each clause is explained in a good English, right? Not in the legal language of notwithstanding and then the loopy language, I would say that, so in that plain language, each of these, the finance bill paragraph or the finance bill sections are explained. Similarly, I suppose, yes, I mean, this is something, and then, I mean, this is the feedback which could be, given to the finance ministry, saying that, all right, if you have a budget speech, and budget speech has to be within a certain time frame and also within certain, number of words. But let us have a slightly better, explanatories, the paragraphs or annexes, and that would serve the purpose. Yes.
Mr. Bhargava, I just like to add some things. I think I sounded a bit too critical. Let me balance it. I think in the last 3-4 years, what we have seen is greater transparency in India's budget documents. Mr. Pandey talked about annexures. It started with Mr. Jaitley's budgets, and I think it's continued. But more than that, what I liked about the last 3 years' budget was the upfront disclosure of the government's extra budget requirements, which is to actually hide the actual extent of budget deficit, was made transparent in the budget speech itself.
So in fact, I'll give you the background. And
this is just one mistake. And this one is to be is a great move towards transparency. But in the same way, till last year, the budget speech was to give all the various major taxation proposals, initiatives, and the custom duty changes in particularly, which is on account of level playing field, which is on account of protection, which is on account of so various reasons. Now those customs things and annexures have gone away from this year. So I think, it's an evolving document. Maybe Mr. Pandey was there, so he was making sure those things were there. Mr. Pandey is not there, so that system has gone away. But as an institution, I feel that budget documents need to be more transparent. Sorry.
No, I was just mentioning that, I will add to what you have said just now, that about the transparency part, this extra budgetary resources is something which, used to get hidden. The government used to spend the money, but then somehow, for technical reasons, it was not getting reflected in this. And again, this is, and when I said that, for a political, let's say, for the political part of the government, they would be uncomfortable, right? But, it was our responsibility because, after all, we were the finance secretary. We are, the secretary to the government, not the secretary to any political party, right? And this is what something, which, all of us always, held to that. So, so when we pointed out and saying that, look, this actually doesn't help, just by not saying something which is so obvious, because the people are able to figure out, people outside are very smart, right? And therefore it is better that, we come upfront and say these things. And we started saying that, and there, I must say that, we got actually full support from the political leadership saying that, yes, let us fully disclose this. About the custom part, I will just mention here. See, this year, a lot of people, asked me saying that, this time, the part B, that is the taxation part, was very small. I said that, look, ideally, that part should be, the minimal, because, the more you have there, the more changes, right? So in this custom part, what has happened is that, I'm again very glad that, not much changes have happened, because, changing the custom duty structure, often, either increasing the custom duty or reducing the custom duty is not good. What has happened, if you are seeing a lot of annexers, at the end, what has happened is that what we figured out that there have been, the thousands of various notifications which were lying there for the last several decades. Right from, this exercise was started last year. So what we said that, look, all those exemption notifications, and if you have seen those custom books, maybe Akhilesh, Ajay would know that, the custom act is this thick, whereas all custom notification is this, and it is impossible for anyone to understand because, which is the correct notification. If you want to import or export something, which is the correct notification, even the custom officers wouldn't know about it. So we said that, look, why don't we do this? Many of those custom notifications, they have outlived their, life. So, they can be either be abolished or they can be incorporated into the main, the provisions itself. So that is the exercise that was taken. Not much changes have happened. Only the major changes which have happened is, I will tell you that, maybe 3-4 changes. One is that, the capital goods. Imagine this capital good, when we used to prepare for the UPSC, maybe 35, 36 years back. So we used to say that, the government wants to encourage, the capital, the manufacturing here. And therefore the capital goods can be imported duty-free, or the project imports also were to be duty-free. The question that, we asked, within the government, saying that, look, in this 21st century, we are sending, we are going to moon and we are doing, every other, space, and we are making such, the development. Why can't we manufacture the capital goods? Why should we continue to give, the duty exemption to the capital goods or the project imports? So in fact, this year, the path has been laid that, certain duties have been removed. In the case of a project imports, the duty has been brought to 7.5. So there are minimal changes, not much changes. And that is why you see that, a lot of annexers, those annexers are because those notifications are going away. So, those things have to be mentioned there.
So talking about customs changes, in fact, I have a point to ask Dr. Gangopadhyay. This year, about 350 items have been removed from the exemption list, and you're going to have custom duty being levied on them. at the minimum at 7.5%. Are we talking about some kind of autarky or protectionism coming back, and would it be regressive, Dr. Gangopadhyay?
Sir, you're on mute.
The free trade concept that we use in textbook economics does not hold. Right? And it's just an ideal situation. The second point to make is that if you should have any duties, they should be as uniform as possible. Should not pick and choose on whom to have duties, right? Or whom not to, on what not to have duties. And in that sense, what Mr. Pandey just mentioned, in terms of getting rid of the exemptions, that's a very welcome step. Now, if you get rid of the exemptions were not at zero duties, right? The exemptions were because there were duties, and hence this exemption was being given. So obviously, if you get rid of exemptions, the duty structure would become positive for those commodities. So in that sense, the response to your question is of two types, right? As far as the budget is concerned, getting rid of exemptions is very good. On the other hand, should the duty rates be high or should they be pushed up because of national production levels or to boost national production? Now, that's a very, very contextual question. The fact of the matter is that globally, countries are becoming protectionist. Now, the question to ask, though in India we often don't, in India we always follow what others are doing, right? If you listen to our discussions, the best argument for doing something is that some other country has done it, right? So since we follow other people's examples, I do not want, in this case, for that to be done. We should instead ask the question that for India, which is a very small presence in global markets, does it pay us to follow this or not? This strategy of encouraging production. And there, as an economist, I would say that giving direct incentives is much better than making consumers pay a higher price. See, because that distorts. The moment you have different taxation rates, whatever may be the justification, the customers or the consumers are immediately hurt. I think we talk a lot about India being a political democracy. But the one interest that even in the 75th year in India is never represented are anybody who is not a producer, anybody who is not a laborer, anybody who is not a businessman, which is you and I, in our roles not as professionals, but as consumers. And that is the one point we miss even in our political discussions. If you look at it, the only organization which was supposed to look at us, it is difficult for it not to look at us, or not to look at all of us, is the CCI. But even in the CCI, you will find discussions being made about incumbent businesses. So that's our problem. We have to understand that political democracy, the focus is neither on political nor on democracy, but on every individual.
Right, sir. Dr. Gangopadhyay, I have one more question for you, and it has to do with your economics. One of the goals of Amrit Kal mentioned by the finance minister is complementing the macroeconomic level growth focus with a microeconomic level all-inclusive welfare focus. I thought it means that the purpose is that the benefits of macroeconomic growth must trickle down to the micro level in an inclusive manner. That's what it seemed to me. I needed your views on it, particularly remembering the fact that if that was the objective, then why are we having a situation where the middle class is in crisis? Why is there a K-shaped recovery, if at all it is taking place? And why is the unorganized and MSME sector in such a stress? So somewhere I need a clarification and understanding from you, sir.
If I may go back to what AKB said, right? Sorry, Mr. Bhattacharya. He's known as AKB.
No, please call me AKB. No.
So if I may go back to what AKB was saying, actually this year, the budget speech or the budget event itself was indeed something that people were waiting for, in the sense that what is the country or the government or the political system going to do in the post-COVID era, right? Because we needed to come out to some depths that we had fallen for no fault of ours, right? So in that sense, it was very much a policy document, at least for this year. And in that policy, and the other thing that, I'm an economist myself, and it may sound as I'm trying to protect my kin, but let me make it very clear that this trickle-down thing is more a journalistic phrase. It is difficult for me to find in any economics, serious economics literature about this trickle-down thing. The same as with the invisible hand, right? Even if you look at Adam Smith himself is writing it is as if there is an invisible hand, right? So I don't want to give too much importance to it, because if we think a little bit, it would be silly of us to think that the trickle-down operates that way. You need the ability of people lower down on the economic scale to be able to absorb the trickle that is happening, right? And that happens only if the people at the lower end of the economic scale are in the marketplace. In India, our youth are not educated, they are not healthy, they are not properly skilled, businesses are not demanding labor. We are having, and this is not just in India, throughout the world, because of the technological advancements that are taking place, right? There is jobless growth. Now, if I do not have a job, no trickle down is going to help unless you give me direct money. Right? So let us, I think it's time for our economy and the class that we belong to become serious in these things. There is not a point of, taking up positions and taking up sides, using cliches and all of that, right? It is, we talk about the welfare states and we look at the West. In Europe, you can't fire labor. As simple as that. But we never look at Europe. When it comes to labor laws, we look at the US. They have unemployment insurance, which we don't have. That is what I mean by we getting serious. We have to understand the entire system. It is not, bits and pieces from here, there, and everywhere, and we put it together and India is made. That was not the idea of India. The idea of India was culturally to be diverse. Not picking up different ideas, different rules, regulations from different countries and putting them together. That's what I mean when I say that our best argument for doing something is an example in some other country. So if we are diverse, we have a young population, they have to get jobs. A welfare system which is on dole to the same people is not sustainable. For example, take our farmers' problem that we are facing. Why is it such a problem? First, are the farmers doing well? No. Are they progressively doing worse? Yes. Year in, year out, they're getting worse and worse and worse. Does every country subsidize farmers? Yes. But what is our problem? Our problem is 50% of the people are subsidizing another 50%. In all other countries that subsidize farmers, 95% are subsidizing 5 to 10%. So which is sustainable? 50% subsidizing 50% is not sustainable. No, unless we understand this, and you don't need rocket science to figure these things out. So in that sense, in this budget, we needed the economy to come out, because you cannot develop without people having jobs. You cannot have jobs without investment taking place. And given the situation, the government has to facilitate that. And in that sense, the budget was very good. How much of it will be done? We can argue, we can discuss, it should have been done more, it should have gone there instead of there. But the general approach of galvanizing the economy through the public sector acting, taking the initiative through public infrastructure development, as well as public digital infrastructure development, right? I think that's a very good thing in the budget. And I do hope that if the jobs get, correspondingly generated, then we are through. One of the things you mentioned was inequality when you listed the points. Even to address inequality in our country, we have to get people more productive jobs. So demand for jobs and skilling of the youth, appropriate skills. Right? And we have to remember that technology is substituting people. Again, we are in a somewhat ironically better situation, because while the world is grappling with gig workers, we have had informality forever. And the large part of our labor market survives that. The majority of labor market survives that. So we should be in a better position. But our people, our technologists, our economists, our policymakers need to think in our context. For example, I'm sorry, I'm taking maybe too much time. Sorry, Prithviraj. But just one quick point I would like to make onto how we need to change our thinking. Every time we think health, we think of lack of doctors, lack of nurses, lack of hospitals, lack of this, lack of that. Now with telemedicine, we have figured out that we can address it. But if we continue to think further, what do we find? We find that many of the pathology services that we need actually can be done remotely, digitally. That shortage can be met with new technology and immediately. So that is where our focus should be. Rather than talking about how technology is losing jobs, stop it there, stop it, allow it there. Just pick up an area, go through it, do the homework, figure out how to do it and do it. I think that should be the approach we should take. We have lots of possibilities. We're just not looking for we are not formulating the problem correctly, and hence we are not finding the solutions.
I really like that point that you made, sir, that, well, there can be a macro, but if the micro is not prepared to take it, how do you have a trickle-down effect? That's, what a put in one. Mr. Srinivas, I have a question for you, which is, one of the goals of Amrit Kal is to, what they say, rely on the virtuous cycle, starting from private capital with public capital investment helping to crowd in private investment. What I understand is that it is the government's capex which will trigger the private capex or inspire or provoke it to jump into it. We have not been seeing it happen. The reasons could be many. But on the other hand, while we are seeing the private sector sitting on the fence, languishing, not willing to invest, I recently read a statement from Kumar Mangalam Birla, who said very confidently that the coming decade will be Capex Mahotsav decade. That was very reassuring. I needed your bit on this.
Thanks, Akhilesh. And I think at the outset, I'd like to say that I'm actually enjoying being just a listener, because I'm getting to learn and absorb quite a lot from really an eminent set of panelists. So my point here is that, see, we've in terms of public capex sort of crowding in private investment, my point is that, if you look at our trend in terms of public capex, in terms of sheer size, right, it's about 6 to 7% of GDP over time. And over the last couple of years, I think state and central governments have tried to push it up. Now, when you look at some of these projects, the idea is you need to get these projects completed for the multiplier effect to truly kick in. So I'll give a couple of examples, right? If we had the second airport at Mumbai, or the Mumbai-Nagpur Expressway, right, or the dedicated freight corridor completed, that's when the multiplier really kicks in. Now, to some extent, yes, you can have private sector investment go alongside in anticipation of that development. Some of them will come through. But the real multiplier is going to happen only when those projects get completed and the projects begin to deliver on the original objective, which is to reduce time or reduce cost, etc. Right? So I think in that sense, the budget has done a great job to ensure that the pace of public sector investment continues and we actually get those projects completed. I'll give you one more example here. During our many field trips, through Access Capital that we've done, the one that has been really memorable for me, right, in the last couple of years has been visits to UP, right, progressive visits to UP and Bihar. And one of the things that, customers who have these electronic goods shops tell us is that, you've suddenly seen increase in sales of air conditioning, right? The reason is power supply is now more predictable. It's there, and so now people can actually run their air coolers and air conditioners, and that's why the sales has picked up, right? So the infrastructure may have taken a couple of years to come in, but the real multiplier of that, comes at one go, and it's a little bit more back-ended, right? So to that extent, I think we need to wait for some of these projects to sort of get completed. And in that sense, a lot of these projects have been ongoing. There's a lot of things that we're doing. So my sense is that some of this spillover is due, right? And there's a sense of, that this is going to come in the next couple of years. And that's why I think Mr. Birla has been optimistic. The other reason to be optimistic, to think about this is also that, you need to see where we are in the business cycle. Right, we are right now just sort of exiting from a downturn. So business confidence is still quite low. So for your crowding in effect to take place, your confidence needs to pick up as well. And on that point, you can see that a lot of balance sheets of larger corporates at least has improved tremendously. Could the crowding in have taken place a couple of years ago when balance sheets were stressed? A little bit difficult, but now the pandemic has helped a lot of these corporates to clean up their balance sheets. They're in far better financial health. So I think that's why there's a sense of pregnancy in terms of that private capex is due. Large businesses' balance sheets are more healthy. In a lot of these projects are going to get completed pretty soon. So I think there is a sense that pretty soon we are going to be in a phase where there's going to be a lot of private capex that comes in to take benefit out of these public sector capex that has been happening over the last couple of years. I think that's the way I would look at it.
So what I want to ask you is, what would be the trigger point? Yes, corporate balance sheets have been deleveraged in a big way. The twin balance sheet problem, as it's called, has been sorted out largely, but it has not triggered private investments. So are we talking a situation that only if capacity utilization crosses that 80-85% mark is when the private investments will kick in? Or is it also a combination of that plus a better ease of doing business and ease of earning that the country needs? How do you look at what would be the trigger point when the private sector actually jumps into the game?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was a debate even before the budget, and we said that, look, consumption is now more narrow. You need consumption to get broad base, and that will sort of improve capacity utilization, and that's when private sector capex begins to kick in. Now, what the government has done instead is to continue with the public sector capex, and we know at least that in terms of trickling down, and therefore its impact on consumption could take some time. So in that sense, I would still say it's still about 12 to 18 months away, but it's going to begin to happen. It's going to begin to happen. I mean, when I say trigger points, there are several trigger points already, right, for capex. There is trigger points in the PLI schemes. There is trigger point in terms of demand, IT demand. There's trigger point in terms of the new the fact that we are moving towards more renewable energy, and the technology on the energy front has changed. So that's a trigger point as well for capex. So my sense is that there's a lot of trigger points. It's just that we have to. It's all moving towards a position where we reach critical mass, and that's when it becomes overwhelmingly apparent that yes, we are in a capex cycle upswing. But if you ask me, I think the ground is already seeded. It's happening on the ground. It's just that for it to become overwhelmingly visible, it will probably take 12 to 18 months.
Yes. So one very often hears and reads about probably the point of time being the last quarter of the coming financial year or something a little beyond that. I think that's where the consensus lies. Ajay, I have a question for you, and it has to do with your expertise technology. One of the goals of Amrit Kaal is promoting digital economy, fintech, tech-enabled development, energy transition, and climate action. Are all these happening because it is a conscious choice and strategy of the government, or is it that it is now because of the inexorable march of technology that it is inevitable that this should happen? And I'm actually trying to draw on your experience as the Aadhaar authority head, where it was considered to be extremely path-breaking. I really don't think there was a compulsion at that time for the nation to do it, but the government probably took a decision. How do you look at this entire, because this Amrit Kal is loaded with technology, digitalization, and everything to do with technology. Is it really a choice or is it a compulsion?
See, I have held that, as a country, we are very uniquely placed in this digital era. And, I have closely seen many other countries, even the developed countries. And in fact, we all should be very proud that today, I'll give you an example. For example, the digital payment, the UPI. Nowhere in the world you can make payment so easily to anyone, right? The street vendor today sits with a QR code, right? And then you can make a payment, right? Nowhere in the world you can have this, right? Now you just see, how has that happened? What is the underlying thing, which has gone into this? The first of all, I still remember, when the 2010, when we were, working, we had started work on Aadhaar. That time, the people didn't have the bank accounts, right? If you don't have the bank account, what is the financial inclusion that you're talking about? And why did the people not have a bank account? Because they did not have any identity. And of course, not having an identity, used to have, not only financially excluded, you are socially also excluded, right? So, so India first, tackled that problem with the digital identity, that is Aadhaar, right? And then, so people used to ask questions that, you have already PAN card, you have other cards, why have, another card? So it was a digital identity, but then as a country, we did not stop there. We went ahead and we said that, okay, all right, we will open bank accounts. So bank accounts were opened. Then we said that, we will do this direct benefit transfers, right, through this mechanism. Then we said that, we will, use that in the taxation. And then finally in, last few years, we are using that infrastructure because, it's like a bootstrap, when, those who have some, background of the computer, the computer also, when it starts, it bootstraps. So that is the bootstrapping that has been done today. And because of that, the one reform, second reform, and then the two reforms, together can, enable you to do third reforms and three reforms, and the fourth reform. So this cycle goes on. And today we have a digital, the digital payment. Now just see the GST, for example. Now the GST is also another thing again. And then, this was, so many of these things, when we actually do this, right? So to a large number of people outside, they appear that, we are talking something abstract, some technology, and then, we are not tackling the real problem, right? But sometimes, then, all of a sudden you find that, look, through this technology and through this digital means, you have actually solved many problems, which the world is still struggling. For example, I had a few months back, I had, come to US, and there I was meeting a professor, a professor in Stanford University, and he was amazed that, about the digital payment, the Aadhaar and, the GST, these are some of the things that, how could you do this, at such a large scale? So now when we are talking about, look, we have all these digital assets. For example, the GST we have a digital payment, we have Aadhaar, we have all these, plus the mobile phones today, 800 million people have access to the internet. And again, this because, your telecom policy, because, this telecom is, even though ARPU has increased over the last few months, to a certain level, by a certain amount, but still it is one of the cheapest, the mobile phone thing in the world, and the data. And because of that, the people are, digitally included and then financially included. So all those infrastructure, Now the question is that how do you exploit this to take it further? And that is what, I was very glad, because normally what happens is that in this budget document, and the people get lost in the outlays, because outlays are important, because without outlays you cannot move an inch ahead. But in addition to outlays, the certain intents, for example, just see the amount of things like the e-registration. One nation, one registration. If you have a property, let's say in Mumbai, you have to actually physically go to Maharashtra and do this registration. Why should that happen? You should be able to register your property, your tenancy, and, you lease your apartment, or you should do from anywhere, right? Similarly, the land records, for example. Now, why should the land records should be, be maintained in the century-old system in this digital age? Then, the e-passport was such a simple thing that, you have, the passport, the people, the fingerprint, everything, why can't you have that? Now, education. Now, this pandemic has actually taught everyone. Till few years back, the people were very, very, hesitant, saying that, this video conference and other thing, you have to set up a, the wide area network, and then, it will cost you so much amount. But you just see that in India, and I was very surprised that when I see even the, the sector which is very, very averse to technology, that is the judiciary. The judiciary today is using, the Supreme Court is using the, the video conferencing hearing the most. Most of the hearings in the high courts and the Supreme Courts are happening like this. So if you can have that, then about this education, now, the classes are being run remotely, but then again, there is a certain digital divide. And that is why, these different channels, education channels. Today, if you see, the most of the universities of the world, they have their online courses like, the Coursera, Stanford University, the MIT, all. And in India, we have IITs and, so many institutions. Why can't there be a competitive, the content, upload? Because, the institutions should, compete with each other and upload the contents, and those whose contents, get maximum, audience, there should be a system to reward that, right? So I saw, many of those things in that budget intent. And, they don't attract a lot of discussion, because sometimes, the tendency is to, dismiss that, saying that, look, this is what it is. But because it is there, and I'm very hopeful, because, I used to see the similar statements about the DBT, the technology, the using the, the GST, technology. And when this has actually happened, then the people are realizing the benefit, right? So similarly, in this technology part, when I see this land records, when I see this registration, when I see, the FASTag, for example, this FASTag also, who would have thought that the FASTag would have come to in our country, on such a scale, and we would have actually implemented this, right? So many of these things. So I'm very glad that, those technology, elements are there. And another thing, very important thing, which I have observed and about which I don't see a lot of discussion there, is about the Gati Shakti. The Gati Shakti, see, we are developing airports. We are developing rails. We are developing roadways. But we are not connecting the dots. Everything, they are actually living in the silos, right? Now there's a time to come and connect, right? And if you see, the logistics cost in India is about 14% of our GDP, right? It is spent on the logistics. In any developed economy, it is 8 to 10%. So if by, using this, this infrastructure, because, you are spending money on infrastructure, and just now it was mentioned that, you have to, ensure completion, then only you will get the advantage. But even after completion, you should connect those dots, and then, you should try to use this, connect, those, the assets or the resources, and get a maximum advantage of this. So if you can, reduce your logistic cost from 14% to, let's say, 8 or 10% of the GDP, imagine, the 4% you'll be saving, right? That is the, and that money could be perhaps be used, and that will, the impact on the productivity Because see, why are we not able to export or even, domestically also? We are talking about that, the industry, why do we need to impose the custom duty? Ideally, in the ideal world, the custom duty should go. But because, we have a productivity challenge and, we need to protect jobs here. So therefore, the government is always placed with that Hobson's choice that, look, all right, we will not have a very, very excessive custom duty, but we'll have a minimal duty so that, we arrive at a balance here. But the crux is the productivity. And for productivity, you need to read this logistics cost is also a very, very important aspect. So I think, many of those things are actually there in the budget here. But yes, I agree. I will agree here is that, the budget can give you the intent. Budget can also give you the, the layout, right? I mean, the financial, the resources, but the execution. And that is what, we used to always in the finance ministry, we used to always grapple with the various other ministry. Because, in the finance ministry, we can make a good plan and also provide the money. But ultimately, the execution is something which, the various other, or, other organs of the government needs to do. And that is so important.
Wonderful. I just have to tell our panelists, I've been told we are a little short on time, but I still have questions.
Akhilesh, if I can just add a point to
Yes,
reiterate to what I mentioned.
Yes.
Aadhaar is almost half a decade old now. But you look at the kind of crowding in of private investment it has created in terms of fintech and all the digital startups that has happened, right? So in a sense, once the infrastructure is created, the crowding in is going to take place. And we couldn't. And in fact, even the kind of crowding in and private investment, even that we couldn't have even imagined, right? With something like Aadhaar. So my sense is that, infrastructure, public infrastructure is always something that is going to create positive multipliers in the economy. It's just that we should focus on getting them completed.
No, I will just add here, this year, 2021, India had 44 unicorns. We have replaced, the UK, and in the world, we have reached the third position. If you see each of those unicorns, they are, directly connecting to, the individuals who are either the consumer or the service provider, the micro service provider, urban company, the people are giving the services. Now, all those things wouldn't have been possible. Either people did not have the mobile phone, people didn't have the bank account, and then, of course, the Aadhaar, right? So with this digital infrastructure, right? So just imagine the kind of a force multiplier. So infrastructure is very important, but I would say that among that infrastructure, the digital infrastructure will give you the maximum amount of gain, in terms of, multiplier effect.
I need to leapfrog questions. So I have a question first for Mr. Bhattacharya. And that's a common question to all of us. Do you think the budget is going to revive growth and get it on a sustainable, consistent basis?
I think the budget has been quite brave in betting on growth with the kind of investment it is trying to make on the capital side. It has also taken some imaginative initiatives. But I think the big challenge would be how it deals with the inflation monster, which is lurking its head. The big challenge, in my view, would be whether the growth will be ensured and will be able to diminish the impact of, increasing debt burden for the government, which constricts the government's own space for further spending. So while the necessary ingredients for ensuring growth, I think are there in this budget, but there are some questions which are slightly disturbing because the inflation risks and the government's own ability being constrained by the increasing interest burden. In the last 3 years, from around 19% to almost a fourth of government's total expenditure is being used up by interest payments. So you are increasingly, and if you look at there was a time when the primary deficit, which is a deficit minus interest payments, had actually come down to almost 0.1%. It went up during the pandemic time to 5%. It was coming down, but it is again going up. So there are questions over the but I think this budget has taken a brave, transparent, good move in betting on growth, which I think should yield results. I'm a little worried about a few things, which once again, going back to my earlier point, a budget of this nature should have made some mention of it. I mean, if the government does not provide more than 5,000 crore for vaccination next year, what is the government's game plan for vaccination at a time when the economic survey 2 days ago or 1 day before talked about vaccination becoming a key determinant for ensuring 8.5% growth? So that's the disconnect that I get at times. So in intention, it is good, it is transparent, but there are question marks over whether inflation will play a spoilsport or whether the government's own ability to spend more will be constrained. And of course, the vaccination is something that worries me a lot. There is no game plan that at least this budget has laid out. I think I'll be brief because we are short of time. Yeah.
Yes, sir. I have another question. In fact, I have a question now from one of our listeners, and I need to take those. And this is Ajay for you, because it has to do with GST, which you have been involved in so deeply. He asks, does record GST collection mean growth in business, and will it increase private investments in the future? Basically, are the record GST...
Akhilesh, I couldn't hear your full sentence. Can you just repeat?
He asks, does record GST collection mean growth in business?
You see, the GST collection, what it reflects today, my own understanding is that if you are, you'll have to look at some figures. In 2019-20, that is the pre-COVID era, we used to, every month, we used to collect something like, about 95,000 crores every month, GST, right? Now, if you see the economy today, we have just reached, because 2021, it went down and then now it has, there is a growth. So in terms of, the absolute GDP today, in the terms of, if you see there, then in the real terms, it has come, around that same level. But in the nominal terms, the GDP, which used to be in the 1920 about 200 lakhs crore, now this year it is expected to be somewhere around 235 lakhs crore. The nominal terms, it has increased by 17% in 2 years, right? 17% in 2 years. In GST, the collection used to be about 95,000 crores. And now the collection, average collection per month is about 1,35,000, 40,000 crores. This is almost more than 40% increase. So the GDP in the nominal terms has increased by 17%, and here it is by 40%. And one of the reasons why I would attribute this is to the administration of GST tax system, and it's the digital administration. It has, because, the people, when the GST system was brought in, and I would say that the GST, the way the GST is being implemented, and in the beginning, there were a lot of apprehensions expressed saying that the GST is failure. I became GST chairman in August 2017, just 1 month after it was launched. And I continued to be there till last year. Till February last year. So almost 4 years, I was, constantly being pilloried as to, what is this happening to the GST and so and so. But then I always used to say everything, to say to everyone, including people in the government, that let's have a patience, right? And this is something, which will actually give you the good, the returns. And, and now you see that the GDP has grown up by 17% in 2 years nominal. Your tax collection has grown up by almost, you can just see that, almost by 40%. So this is something, and that actually shows that if you, use, if you leverage your digital assets and digital resources, properly, along with the proper framework of law, the gains will be phenomenal. Just imagine that 40,000 crores of rupees every month. So in 1 year, it becomes 5 lakh crores of rupees. Of course, 50% go to the states, and then the 50% will remain to the center. And out of that also, a large portion of, the money will go back to the state governments. So the states will be getting a lot of, advantage out of this. So this is something. And then there is one more point, which a lot of people may not be aware of this, that even though there are many countries which may be having GST, but India is perhaps the only country where in a federal structure like this, you have a GST. There are many countries where you have a unitary form of the government, no state government. There, you can have a GST. But in India, with 35 states and union territory, you have a GST. So that's one very, very distinguishing factor. Other is that here is the GST, which is so granular that you are capturing the invoice-wise information. Akhilesh, you would be aware that most of the returns in the world are always aggregate. My total sales turnover is X. Here, what you need to do is that you don't need to report your total aggregate. You need to only report your invoice, and then, your returns gets made. And that is, in that direction we are going. And just see the advantage of this. It has become very, very difficult to suppress your, the actual GST turnover.
Yes.
And therefore you have to pay tax, and we are seeing the advantage. And then the spillover effect is actually also in the corporate, the corporate tax also. Because you can't have a different turnover, in the GST and different turnover in the, the corporate tax returns. So these are the advantages there. But then, yes, as we grow, because, so so this time the GST growth is because of efficiency factor and plus the growth factor, which I have explained. Because, half of that, the growth in the GST is because of the, the nominal growth, and remaining half is because of the efficiency. But now, whether there is still certain scope, yes. But to that extent, efficiency gain will be that much. This is something, over the period of time, it will taper off.
We actually applaud the government for these initiatives, sir. The students want to ask questions directly to the panelists. MC, you can please ask them to do that.
Now we will taking questions from the attendees. The first question is from Simran Banka. Kindly unmute yourself and ask your question. Simran Banka. Okay, I think she can't unmute herself. Manveen, you can go ahead with your question.
Thank you, sir. So first of all, thank you for your insightful session. So my question is, how does the government decide on which products to increase or decrease the duty or the tax rate? What are the factors that affect this decision regarding a particular product?
Ajay, I think that's a question directed to you, sir.
Okay. So yeah, I'm just waiting.
Yes, sir. It was
so it's a good question. And so I don't know whether you are referring to the custom duty or the GST, because there are two types of duties. If it is a custom duty, then the broad principle today is being followed is that there should be a minimal custom duty. The custom duty either should not be there or it should be a minimal duty. And what happens is that the factor that is taken into account is that what is the production capacity here, right? And if the production capacity here, and what are the chances that some other countries will start dumping their products into our country at a very, very subsidized, they can give subsidy and they can artificially bring down the prices and then dump here. and then continuing doing that for a few years, and wait for the domestic industries to vanish, and then they will slowly start increasing their prices. So what we have to do is that every time what we see is that if certain products, if we have if we have our own domestic capacity, the domestic manufacturers of those goods, then in that particular case, the custom duty are so modulated to ensure that there is no dumping of the goods by some the foreign countries there, and so that the domestic industries also survives. But at the same time, we have to also balance that we should not give undue protection to the domestic industries, because it should not happen that, look, we have imposed certain custom duty, and then the domestic industries, they become inefficient, and then they start indulging in the profiteering. So that is the kind of the balancing goes on every year. So many times what we get, for example, you must have noticed in this budget, sometimes I will explain you the example. In this budget, the scrap, the steel scrap, so we have a manufacturers, there are big manufacturers of steels here, right? Now the steel prices are going up, right? Now the steel prices are going up, and then those companies balance sheet, if you see the steel manufacturer, they are doing very well, right? So the idea was that, perhaps, they should have brought down the prices. But because, the government doesn't control the prices, and the government can't tell those companies to, reduce the prices. So then last year, what we did was that we said that, all right, the scraps will be imported, the free of duty. Because, what will happen is that those, MSME or those industries which are using steel, right, if they are getting their raw material at a higher cost from the domestic industry, then they can import a scrap, the free of duty, so that, there is also a pressure on the domestic industry to reduce the prices. So this is one, so these are the considerations which are taken. Considerations go into fixing the custom duty rate. So far as the GST is concerned, in case of a GST, actually, historically, what has happened is that prior to GST, the state governments used to have a VAT, value added tax, and then the union government used to have excise duty, right? And there were different rates on the various, the items. So when the GST was brought in, then the GST was brought in on the basis of revenue neutrality, saying that, look, we are bringing GST, but we have to assure to the states that they will continue to get the same revenue. So if that assurance was to be given, and also the assurance was given that they will be assured of 14% growth, annual growth year on year for the next 5 years. And that 5 years is ending on June this year. So if that was the case, then the whole idea was that let us see that which item had, what kind of a rate in the pre-GST days, that is the VAT and the excise duty, and then what will be the rate, what should be the GST rate. And so we used to call this the rate equalization, that the rate, prior to the GST should be around the same, post GST minus certain, efficiency gains. And that is why, if you had gone strictly by, the rate equality, then the average rate for the GST would have been somewhere around 16-17%. But what the average rate in the GST is 11.4%. The some items may be 28%, but there's a lot of items which are either exempt or 5% or 2%, in that range. So in this manner, it is decided. And within that, certain items of mass consumptions, particularly the consumption by, the people from the, the vulnerable sections of the society, they are either tax-free. For example, the food grains are tax-free. Then there are certain items, which are taxed at 5%. Then there are certain items which are taxed at, the 12%. Most of the raw materials are taxed at 18%. And then the luxury goods, they are taxed at 28%, and then above that, there are certain cess. So these are the broad principles on which, these tax rates are decided.
Ajay, thank you so much. We need to, I think we are running against time. I have a reminder. MC, you can take up the vote of thanks, please.
On behalf of the Economics Club, I express my sincere gratitude to Dr. Ajay Bhushan Pandey, Mr. Prithviraj Srinivas, Dr. Subhashis Gangopadhyay, Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya, and Mr. Akhilesh Bhargava for taking out the time from their busy schedules and sharing their valuable insight with all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, with this, we conclude our discussion on the post-budget session. We hope that session was enlightening for every one of you present here. On behalf of the Economics Club of IMI Delhi, we would like to take this opportunity to commend all panel members, guests, professors, student council, and staff of IMI for making the session an unparalleled success. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Good night.